Hey everyone, quick thing before we dive in. I was looking at my analytics and it turns out most of the people watching aren't actually subscribed. See this? Way more views than subscribers. If you're enjoying the videos and want to see more, hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and you'll never miss new uploads. Alright, let's get into it.
The fluorescent lights of the Metropolitan Museum storage facility hummed their familiar tune as I bent over the authentication table, examining the latest acquisition through my magnifying lens. Dr. Gavin Sanders, they called me on the placard outside my office, lead curator of ancient Mesopotamian artifacts. 34 years old and already considered an expert in my field, though some days I felt like I was just playing dress-up in a scholar's clothes. The dagger lay before me, its obsidian blade reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. We'd acquired it from a private collector's estate, supposedly authentic, dating back to the Neo-Babylonian period. The blade itself was unremarkable, black volcanic glass, expertly knapped, with cuneiform inscriptions running along both edges. The handle, however, was extraordinary. Carved from what appeared to be crystallized amber, it contained swirling patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. I'd been skeptical from the moment it arrived. The provenance was questionable at best, and the collector had insisted it was cursed or some such nonsense. Archaeological frauds were becoming increasingly sophisticated, and I'd learned to trust my methodical approach over romantic notions of ancient mysteries. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. I should have gone home hours ago, but something about this piece nagged at me. The inscriptions were too perfect, too well preserved. I adjusted the magnification and leaned closer, trying to make out the finer details of the cuneiform script. The first line was standard ceremonial language, "By the grace of Marduk, King of Gods." But the second line made me pause. The characters were different, older, more primitive. Pre-cuneiform, perhaps? That would make this artifact significantly older than initially assessed, possibly worth millions rather than thousands. I reached for my translation notes, and that's when it happened. The corner of the paper caught the blade's edge, and instinctively I pressed my thumb against what I thought was the dull back edge to steady the dagger. Instead, I felt the razor-sharp obsidian slice through my skin like it was nothing. "Damn it," I muttered, pulling my hand back. A thin line of blood welled up from the cut, and before I could grab a tissue, a single crimson drop fell directly onto the blade's surface. The moment my blood touched the obsidian, everything changed. The black surface began to glow with veins of amber light, pulsing like a heartbeat. The swirling patterns in the handle started to move, becoming a miniature whirlwind of golden energy. The cuneiform inscriptions blazed with the same amber radiance, shifting and rewriting themselves before my eyes. The museum around me began to dissolve, the familiar walls and ceiling melting away like watercolors in rain. Sand poured from nowhere and everywhere, swirling around me in a cyclone of amber and crimson particles. I tried to drop the dagger, but my fingers wouldn't respond. The handle seemed to cling to my skin through some impossible force. The world spun, twisted, and then went black. I awoke on cold stone, my body aching from the impossible transition. Gone were the sterile white walls and fluorescent lighting of the museum. Instead, I found myself in a vast corridor lined with empty pedestals, each one shaped like an hourglass. The architecture was unmistakably Mesopotamian, massive stone blocks fitted together with mathematical precision, but ancient and crumbling. Sand trickled constantly from cracks in the ceiling, creating small piles that seemed to shift and move on their own. The air tasted dry and metallic, with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach turn. Faint whispers echoed through the corridor, just beyond the threshold of comprehension. The dagger was still in my right hand, though I had no memory of maintaining my grip through the transition. When I tried to drop it, my fingers wouldn't respond. It wasn't exactly fused to my skin, but some invisible force prevented me from releasing it. As I struggled to my feet, my eyes fell upon ancient inscriptions carved into a nearby wall. They were written in a script I had never seen before, not cuneiform, not hieroglyphic, but something more primitive and alien. Yet, as I stared at them, certain symbols began to resolve themselves into meaning, as if the knowledge was being poured directly into my mind. Palace of the Sands, Keeper of Doors, 7 Trials. The rest remained indecipherable. I ran my fingers over the strange characters, feeling their impossible age. This place was ancient beyond reckoning, older than any civilization I had studied. I began walking cautiously down the corridor, the dagger still gripped in my hand. My footsteps echoed in the vast space, each one sending up small clouds of sand that hung suspended longer than they should have. The empty pedestals I passed bore inscriptions of their own, names of artifacts perhaps, though in languages I couldn't begin to decipher. At the end of the corridor stood a massive archway, inscribed with more of the strange symbols. Beyond it, I could see glimpses of a vast central chamber containing what appeared to be an enormous hourglass, easily 3 stories tall, filled with swirling crimson sand. But between me and that chamber lay a labyrinth of passages, each one darker and more ominous than the last. I chose the left passage and immediately triggered my first trap. A section of floor gave way beneath my feet, with the grinding sound of ancient machinery awakening. I plummeted into darkness, a scream torn from my throat as I fell. 20 feet down, the pit narrowed into a forest of bronze spikes, each one as thick as my arm and honed to wicked points. One of them punched through my left thigh, the pain so intense that my vision whited out for a moment. When awareness returned, I found myself impaled and bleeding, my leg useless and my vision graying at the edges. The spike had gone clean through, pinning me in place like an insect in a collection. Blood pooled beneath me, dripping onto the sand-covered floor of the pit. I could hear my heartbeat slowing, feel the cold spreading from my extremities inward. This was death, real, inescapable death, and I was experiencing every excruciating second of it. Then the dagger in my palm grew warm, then hot, then searing. Without any input from me, it activated. The world seemed to fold in on itself. Time snapped backward like a rubber band, and suddenly I was standing at the edge of the pit again. 30 seconds before my fall. My leg was whole, the pain gone, but something was different. When I tried to take a step back from the edge, my left leg dragged slightly. I had a noticeable limp where before I'd been perfectly sound. The dagger whispered in a voice like shifting sand, "The first price is paid. 6 more await." I staggered back from the pit, my mind reeling. Had I just died and been brought back? The memory of the spike tearing through my flesh was still vivid, too real to be hallucination. I looked down at the dagger, which had gone cool in my hand again, its amber patterns swirling lazily. "What is this place?" I demanded aloud, my voice echoing in the empty corridor. "What do you want from me?" No answer came, only the continuing whisper of sand through cracks in the ceiling. I edged around the pit this time, staying close to the wall. My new limp made progress slower, more deliberate. Each step required conscious effort, where before I'd moved with the easy confidence of health. The next chamber revealed itself as I rounded a corner, a vast room filled with mechanical gears, each one larger than a man and made of what appeared to be bronze or copper. They turned in complex patterns, powered by cascades of sand that flowed through channels in the ceiling. The entire mechanism resembled a massive clockwork, though what it measured, if anything, I couldn't begin to guess. To cross the chamber, I would need to time my passage between the meshing gears. A narrow pathway wound through the mechanism, but at multiple points, the gears came together like enormous teeth, powerful enough to crush stone, let alone human flesh. As I studied the pattern, trying to calculate the timing, something strange happened. My vision blurred, then resolved into a scene overlaid upon reality. A woman in 1920s expedition clothing attempting the same crossing. She moved confidently at first, her steps precise, but then hesitated at a critical juncture. The enormous gears caught her, pulling her in before she could scream. I watched in horror as her body was crushed, blood spattering across the bronze surfaces. The vision faded, leaving me shaking. What had I just witnessed? A hallucination? A memory? Then knowledge bloomed in my mind, as if planted there. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, archaeologist, Oxford University. 1923. She had found the dagger embedded in a temple wall during an expedition to Ur. Like me, she had activated it with her blood. Like me, she had been brought here. Like me, she had died. The dagger was showing me the fate of a previous victim. A warning, perhaps, or just cruel torment. I studied the gears more carefully now, noting their pattern. They rotated in sequences of 5, with a 2-second gap where a nimble person could slip through the largest intersection. Under normal circumstances, I could have made it easily, but my new limp changed the calculation. My left leg wouldn't move fast enough for the standard timing. I would need to start earlier, move faster with my right to compensate. I took a deep breath and began. The first few crossings went smoothly. Wait for the pattern, dash through the gap, stop in the safe zone between gear clusters. The sound was deafening, the enormous metal teeth grinding against each other with the weight of centuries. 3 crossings down, 2 to go. I was sweating now, my lame leg aching from the exertion. The next intersection was the trickiest. 3 gear clusters coming together, leaving only a narrow triangular space safe for passage. I counted down, watching the rotation. 5, 4, 3. I dashed forward, but my left leg betrayed me. It dragged on the stone floor, costing me precious fractions of a second. I was halfway through when I realized I wouldn't make it. The gears were closing too fast. I lunged desperately, trying to clear the mechanism, but my right arm got caught as the massive gears came together. I felt the bones shatter instantly, pulverized between metal surfaces designed to grind stone. The pain was beyond comprehension as my arm was pulled deeper into the mechanism, dragging me with it. Blood sprayed across my face as the gears pulverized flesh and bone alike, drawing me inexorably toward total destruction. The dagger activated again. Time rewound, and I stood at the gear chamber's entrance once more. But now my right arm hung partially withered at my side, the fingers curled into a permanent claw. I could move it slightly, but it would never again have the strength to climb, to write, to hold a magnifying glass over an artifact. 2 resurrections, 2 permanent injuries. "The second price is paid," the dagger whispered. 5 more await. I slumped against the wall, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. What was happening to me? What was the purpose of this torture? More symbols on the walls caught my attention. This time, I could understand more of them, as if the dagger was gradually teaching me this alien language. 7 gates, heart chamber, the worthy return, the unworthy serve. Still fragmentary, but a pattern was emerging. This place wanted something from me. It was testing me. But to what end? I found another way across the gear chamber. A fallen pillar created a bridge over part of the mechanism, allowing me to bypass the trickiest crossing. My weakened arm made balancing difficult, but I managed to edge across without falling. The next chamber was a long corridor lined with alcoves. Each alcove contained a statue of a hooded figure, hands outstretched. As I stepped into the corridor, I felt a subtle shift in the air pressure. The statues began to move, their stone heads turning to follow my progress. I took another step, and one of the statue's hands moved, revealing a small blowgun concealed in its palm. Before I could react, a dart shot out, striking me in the neck with pinpoint accuracy. The effect was instantaneous. My throat closed, my lungs seized, and I collapsed to my knees. The poison worked with terrifying speed, shutting down my nervous system while leaving me fully conscious. I convulsed on the stone floor, tasting copper and bitter almonds, watching my hands shake uncontrollably until everything went dark. When time rewound, I found myself at the entrance to the statue corridor again. But now, my left eye saw only darkness, completely blind, while my right retained its vision. The world had become a flat, 2-dimensional place, with no depth perception and a vast missing section to my left. "The third price is paid," came the whisper. 4 more await. With each resurrection, more visions came, fragments of knowledge from previous victims. I saw Professor Giovanni Rossetti, 1954, dying of thirst in a desert chamber that accelerated dehydration. Dr. Sarah Bright, 1987, torn apart by mechanical scarabs in an insect maze. All had been brought here by the dagger. All had died repeatedly, and with each vision came more understanding of the inscriptions. By my 4th death, falling from a crumbling staircase that collapsed under my weight, I could read full sentences in the strange script. This death left me deaf in my right ear and destroyed my sense of balance, making each step a nauseating challenge in spatial orientation. One particular inscription, discovered after my 4th revival, finally revealed the truth. 7 deaths to reach the heart, The 8th brings eternal night. The worthy may leave as keepers. The unworthy remain as servants. I traced the characters with trembling fingers. The palace wasn't just a death trap. It was a testing ground. Those who reached the central chamber, the heart, after 7 deaths would be allowed to return to the real world, but bound to the palace's will as its keepers. Those who died an 8th time before reaching the heart would be deemed unworthy, condemned to eternal servitude within these walls. The palace wanted me to fail. Each resurrection was designed to make the next challenge harder, increasing the likelihood of that 8th final death. It was stacking the deck against me, ensuring that only the most determined or the most lucky could ever reach the heart. My 5th death came in a chamber of fire jets that shot from the walls in patterns that changed every 30 seconds. I had almost navigated through when my damage balance caused me to stumble directly into a jet's path. The flames engulfed me instantly, the heat so intense it seared my lungs with the first breath. I died screaming, my flesh charring black, my bones exposed as the fire consumed me. Upon resurrection, I discovered my lungs were permanently damaged. Each breath came as a wheezing struggle, the air never quite enough to satisfy. Climbing stairs or running would now be nearly impossible. The 6th chamber contained massive stone blocks that slid unpredictably from the walls, threatening to crush anything in their path. My damaged vision, impaired hearing, and compromised balance made tracking their movements nearly impossible. I was halfway across when I misjudged the speed of an approaching block. It slammed into me with the force of a freight train, crushing my spine and internal organs against the opposite wall. Death came as a relief from the agony of a body pulverized beyond recognition. When I returned this time, my spine was permanently twisted, forcing me to walk hunched and sideways, my movements awkward and painful. 6 resurrections, 6 debilitating injuries. By the time I faced the final gauntlet leading to the heart chamber, I was a shambling wreck, limping, half-blind, partially deaf, struggling to breathe, with one useless arm and a twisted spine. The palace had done everything possible to ensure I would fail this final test. The gauntlet was a hellish combination of all previous challenges: floor sections that gave way, mechanical blades that swung from the ceiling, poison darts firing from walls, jets of flame erupting from the floor, and crushing blocks sliding unpredictably from hidden compartments. In my weakened state, it seemed impossible to cross. I stood at the entrance, watching the deadly ballet of ancient mechanisms, despair threatening to overwhelm me. How could anyone navigate this in peak condition, let alone as a broken shell of a human? But the visions and inscriptions had given me more than just horror. They had shown me how the palace worked, how its traps functioned, how its magic operated. And I realized something crucial. The palace operated according to rigid rules. Its magic was powerful, but inflexible. It could be beaten at its own game. The inscription near the gauntlet entrance read, "The 7th death opens the way to the heart. The worthy become keepers. The unworthy perish." Becoming a keeper meant returning to the real world, but as an agent of the palace, bound to find others, lure them here, feed the palace's hunger for new victims. A twisted freedom, but freedom nonetheless. But what if there was a third option? My curator's mind had been assembling the pieces throughout my ordeal. The palace wasn't just a trap, it was a mechanism, a temporal engine powered by sacrifice. The central hourglass wasn't just a symbol, it was the actual heart of the place, the battery storing the energy of countless deaths across centuries. What would happen if I destroyed it? It would mean risking my 7th death, my last chance at twisted freedom. If I failed, I would still avoid eternal servitude, but I would be bound to the palace's will. But if I succeeded, perhaps I could break the entire cycle. I made my decision. Instead of carefully navigating the traps, I charged straight through them, using my broken body as a battering ram. My limp made running a lurching, awkward affair, but I pushed through the pain, focusing entirely on the massive hourglass visible through the archway at the end of the gauntlet. The first trap triggered immediately, a section of floor dropping away beneath me. I had anticipated this and threw myself forward, landing painfully on the opposite edge. My withered right arm screamed in protest as I dragged myself up, but I kept moving. Mechanical blades swung down from the ceiling, their whistling sound almost inaudible to my damaged hearing. One caught me across the back, slicing deep into muscle. Blood soaked my shirt, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. I staggered onward. A poison dart struck my shoulder, and I could feel the toxin entering my bloodstream, spreading numbness through my left side. My already compromised vision began to blur, the world taking on a golden haze. Not now. Not when I was so close. Flame jets erupted from the floor ahead, creating a wall of fire across the passage. With my damaged lungs, I couldn't hold my breath long enough to run through. Instead, I grabbed a fallen piece of masonry with my good arm and hurled it at the mechanism I'd spotted controlling the flames. The impact jammed the gears, and the flames sputtered momentarily, just long enough for me to lurch through, though not before the heat seared the right side of my face, blistering the skin instantly. Crushing blocks began sliding from the walls, their grinding approach echoing in my good ear. I threw myself forward in a desperate dive, rolling beneath one massive stone and coming up directly in the path of another. I twisted awkwardly, my spine screaming in protest, and the block caught only my foot, pulverizing it to a bloody mess. I dragged myself forward on elbows and knees, leaving a trail of blood behind me. The poison was working faster now, my heartbeat becoming erratic. The world pulsed between blinding clarity and foggy confusion. Just a few more yards to the heart chamber, just a few more. I crawled across the threshold, the last of the gauntlet's traps falling behind me. Ahead loomed the massive hourglass, its crimson sand swirling in defiance of gravity. The glass gleamed in the amber light that seemed to have no source, the sand within pulsing like a living heart. At the base of the hourglass stood a pedestal with an impression perfectly shaped to fit the dagger. The final inscription above it read, "Place the key. Accept the bond. Become the keeper." This was the choice the palace offered: surrender the dagger, accept my role as its agent in the world, and return with my seventh life intact. I would be bound to its will, but physically free to leave. The dagger whispered urgently, "Place me on the pedestal. Accept your role. Become the keeper. Many have tried. Few have reached this far. You are worthy." I could feel my life ebbing away, the poison, the blood loss, the accumulating damage to my broken body. I had perhaps minutes before death claimed me again. My seventh death, the one that would seal my fate as the palace's keeper. But I had seen the truth in the visions of previous victims. Being a keeper was just another form of slavery, a longer leash, but a leash nonetheless. The palace had been consuming victims for centuries, growing stronger with each feeding. How many more would it claim if I accepted this role? With the last of my strength, I lurched toward the hourglass itself, ignoring the pedestal and its promise of perverted freedom. The dagger grew scorching hot in my hand, trying to force me to drop it or change course. "The pedestal!" it hissed. "The ritual must be completed. You cannot defy the ancient compact." "Watch me," I gasped through blood-flecked lips. I reached the base of the hourglass as my legs finally gave out. Collapsing against the cool glass surface, I raised the dagger with my one functional arm and plunged it directly into the hourglass itself. The impact created a spider web of cracks across the ancient crystal. The crimson sand within began to swirl violently. A storm of temporal energy suddenly released. The cracks spread, widened, and then the hourglass shattered in an explosion of glass and sand and time itself. My seventh death took me in that moment, my body shredded by the blast. But instead of the simple rewind I had experienced before, I found myself suspended in a void of swirling sand and fragmented time. The palace's voice, no longer just the dagger, but the entire structure, screamed in fury and fear. "What have you done? The heart is broken, the cycle disrupted." But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of being ejected from the palace or condemned to servitude, I felt the temporal energies flowing into me. The palace had been designed with rigid rules, and I had exploited a loophole. By destroying the heart at the exact moment of my seventh death, I had redirected the transformation process. The palace needed a heart. I became that heart. My consciousness expanded across the structure, sensing every grain of sand, every stone block, every trap mechanism. The palace was mine now, or perhaps more accurately, I was the palace. Not its slave, but its master. I could feel my body reconstructing itself, but not as flesh and bone. Instead, I was becoming something new, a being of crystallized sand and amber energy, my form fluid yet tangible, my awareness extended across dimensions. With my newfound awareness, I rewrote the palace's purpose. No longer would it lure victims through the dagger and other artifacts. Instead, it would become a sanctuary, a secure repository for dangerous temporal objects, containing them safely away from human contact. I could sense other artifacts scattered across the world, each one connected to this nexus, each one a potential lure for unsuspecting victims. The dagger was just one node in a vast network of ancient technologies, all of them designed to harvest human consciousness for some long-forgotten purpose. With a thought, I severed those connections, one by one. I awoke at my authentication table, face down in my research notes. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and my neck ached from sleeping in an uncomfortable position. According to the clock, only 7 minutes had passed since I'd begun examining the Dagger of Time. But I knew better. My thumb bore a thin cut from the obsidian blade, already scabbed over. The dagger itself lay inert on the examination table. To any casual observer, it was simply an interesting archaeological specimen. But I was changed fundamentally. When I caught my reflection in the polished surface of a display case, I saw myself as I had always been, outwardly. But beneath the skin, I could see grains of sand flowing through my veins instead of blood. When I passed my hand through a shaft of light, it momentarily crystallized, becoming translucent amber before returning to apparent flesh. I was no longer human, or not entirely. Part of me remained permanently in the palace, while part of the palace now resided in me. I could step between the worlds at will, existing simultaneously in the museum and in the endless corridors of my new domain. My knowledge had expanded beyond mortal comprehension. Ancient languages unfolded before me like open books. I could sense the flow of time around objects, identifying those with dangerous temporal properties by the distortions they created. That night, I began my new work. The museum's cameras would show Dr. Gavin Sanders working late in his office, examining artifacts, writing reports. None would capture the moments when my body dissolved into swirling sand, only to reappear hours later with new acquisitions. Dangerous objects retrieved from private collections, archaeological digs, museum storerooms around the world. Within 3 months, I had collected over 30 artifacts with temporal properties, each one secured within my palace, their powers neutralized. To the archaeological world, these disappearances were mysteries, items simply vanishing from locked vaults, leaving no trace of theft. Insurance companies paid claims. Security systems were upgraded. Life moved on. The Dagger of Time sat in a sealed display case in the restricted collection, labeled as an interesting example of Neo-Babylonian craftsmanship, nothing more. Tourists walked past it every day, never knowing how close they came to an ancient trap that had once consumed dozens of lives. In quiet moments, usually late at night when my human form sat alone in my office, I could feel my consciousness expanding through the palace, checking the seals on contained artifacts, maintaining the new wards I had established. The sands flowed through my veins, between worlds, maintaining the balance I had created. I had paid a price for my freedom, no longer entirely human, forever divided between worlds, carrying memories that weren't originally mine. But I had chosen that price willingly, and that choice had made all the difference. The sand continues to fall, but now it falls in protection rather than predation. And I remain its willing guardian, forever watching to ensure that some doors, once closed, stay closed. After all, there are worse fates than being the keeper of dangerous knowledge, being its victim, for instance.